Hello, this is Critical Trader with the sixth in a series of introductory tutorials to help you get started using the volume profile indicator. In this video, I will show you how to use a custom overnight session template. Instead of reviewing one of the sample workspaces we downloaded during the previous video, which uses the custom overnight session, I will walk through the steps of constructing that workspace. When I received your third-party qualified machine ID and activated your license, I sent you a link to a screencast showing the definition of the custom overnight session template in the foreground of the ES workspace that uses it. Here it is. We're going to create this, and then we're going to create the charts. So let's go ahead and create the session for the CME US Index Futures Instruments. From the NT Control Center, click on Tools, and then Session Manager. Scroll till you find the CME US Index Futures ETH session. This is actually a nearly 24-hour session, and since it spans the RTH, we want to modify that so that it only goes from the open of the Globex session through the open of the RTH session. Now that that is selected, click Copy. Enter CME US Index Futures ON. If you want to make use of the sample VAP files in workspaces that use this session, the spelling of the name must be exactly as shown. Now, let's edit each entry to set the end time to the open of the RTH. Highlight the row, click Edit. The times shown are based on Central Time in the US. As long as you're consistent, it doesn't matter what this time zone is set to. It was already set for the ETH based on Central Time. I'm going to stick with that, even though I'm located in Eastern Time. And there we have it. Click OK, and we're done. Okay, so now we're ready to start building the workspace, which will make use of this custom overnight session template as well as the RTH. Let's first create a 1-minute single day chart which makes use of the US Index Futures overnight session. As I mentioned in the previous video, each workspace must have at least one chart whose VAP mode is set to use tick volume for each session. Just so we can remember what session this is, let's update the label that's shown. We're going to say ON for overnight, use tick volume. This label will show up here so we have a quick view of what this chart represents. So now let's add the indicator. We don't need composite showing on this chart or value nodes. We will not need profile showing for my composites. Leave this as it is, and this is where we want to change to use tick volume. We don't need to show gaps. Don't need to show initial balance. I'm just scrolling through the various categories to see which features I want on or not. Don't need to show naked VPOCs. I'll leave the open, high, low, and close set. Open swing we don't need. Let's change the color. I like to use a darker color for the overnight, just as a quick reminder on the profiles, that is. No value areas, epoch. We don't need session VLAP. And we really don't need the toolbar or volume breakdown. So that's it. Click OK. There's the profile for the overnight session template in use tick volume mode. Next, let's create a one-day use tick volume chart for the RTH. And again, I like to update the label just so I know what this chart represents. Add the indicator. We'll leave the fill color as cyan. Use tick volume. We don't need the profile. Let's make sure this is false. That's fine. And there we have the one day. Actually, RTH just opened. One day use tick volume RTH session. So again, just to recap, every workspace should have a single day use tick volume mode chart for each session template used in that workspace. The reason for this is to guarantee that the daily incremental VAP cache files will always be full. If you're following FT71, I believe he uses a 2000 volume bar chart to monitor the open swing. Also enable the open swing feature. Colors could use a little adjusting. Open swing color, let's change that to, so it looks like in this particular example of the current RTH, the indicator is selected basically the low of the day as the open swing low and the open swing high at 1976 even. So if you're not going to use this particular chart for either monitoring the open swing or for trading, just make sure you still have the single day use tick volume chart in the background. Yes, it is later in the day and I'm continuing this part 1 to cover one additional topic before building the other charts of the workspace. You may have noticed on the RTH chart the display of overnight high, low, and VPOC, and you'll notice it corresponds to the overnight session template values that we have as well. I want to quickly go over how that works. There's two parts of configuring the ability to be able to plot the overnight high, low, and VPOC on the RTH chart. First, you need to have a chart that is running with an overnight session. Let me show you the setup on the RTH chart first. You'll notice show overnight stats is true. In this property, overnight stats session name is set to the name of the session that we're using for our overnight chart. If you read the description of show overnight stats, The purpose is to be able to display the previous overnight stats for the RTA session. If you come into the chart with the overnight session template, there's a parameter under operational parameters called enable stats export. This is set to something other than false. Append or overwrite. It will stream various stats to a text file. It will stream various stats to a text file on exit, refresh, or on a Control X key press. Append appends the current stats to the file, otherwise it'll overwrite the existing file. That file's stored in the stats folder under the home folder. So with this set to overwrite, this chart will automatically create a file to record the stats. The name of the file corresponds to the name of the session template and the instrument, and this is it here. So with that exported, with the RTH chart show overnight stats set to true, it'll look for a file containing this name and the parameters here available to adjust the colors and of course the labels. This ends part 1. In part 2 we'll create the other charts of the workspace.